Well, are you sure it didn't happen before? You have no basis to ask that.
Her recollection is horrible.
No, it's not.
Some letters that were sent to Judge
Blake Lively's latest attorney accidentally placed the very document in front of the judge that could completely unravel her defense, a mistake as damaging as it sounds. Legal team changes in the middle of a scandal often carry hidden risks, especially when the outgoing lawyer forgets to warn the replacement about sensitive materials that must stay off the record. The new attorney entered court believing he was simply doing his duty, unaware that he was about to trigger a major setback. What began as a straightforward pre-trial hearing to review procedural motions quickly turned into the first visible fracture in Blake's defense strategy. During the session, her lead lawyer, David Michael Gottel, unexpectedly stood up, gathered his files, and walked out without explanation. Court insiders later revealed he had handed the judge a note citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts before leaving for good. The hearing continued without him. By the next morning, a junior lawyer from the same firm arrived to fill the void, clearly underprepared and unfamiliar with key details of the case. Still, the court moved forward. The new representative introduced himself, tried to steady the defense, and pressed on, until one misguided statement caused an uproar. In an attempt to sound principled, he referenced a disgraced advocate as a moral example, a blunder that only deepened the chaos. What followed wasn't just a procedural slip. It exposed the growing instability of Blake's defense as her team struggled to keep control.
They were the ones who kind of created this new Me Too law, and they wanted Judge Lehman to use it in Blake Lively's case, which is basically saying that if you are suing someone for SH, they're not allowed to sue you back for defamation.
When addressing Judge Lehman, the replacement attorney pointed to a collection of letters submitted in support of Blake, urging the court to consider them under the controversial new Me Too law. This doctrine is often invoked to shield individuals who claim emotional or reputational harm from retaliatory defamation suits. The lawyer argued that these letters reflected strong public backing for Blake and captured the broader importance of advocacy for victims. He insisted that the court weigh them carefully as part of the overall climate surrounding the case.
LA Times did a big story on this, and they also mentioned the letter that was sent from an individual, a lawyer. Her name is Elise Dorsey, and LA Times was saying that a separate letter of interest was also filed by Elise Dorsey, a former federal employee.
The attorney emphasized that these letters came from respected legal experts, advocacy organizations, and even high-profile survivors of workplace harassment. His tone was measured and confident, until one particular name was mentioned. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. The mention of a single individual changed the energy in the courtroom entirely, turning what had been a persuasive argument into a wave of skepticism that swept across the defense table.
SH survivor who described being sued for defamation after speaking out and said the law at issue could have spared her years-long legal.
The turning point came when the defense cited a letter from Ellie Dorsey. The courtroom fell silent as soon as her name was read aloud. Valden's counsel quickly rose and asked, "Your Honor, is the defense actually relying on Miss Ellie Dorsey's testimony?" Judge Lehman, clearly puzzled, sought clarification. The new attorney confirmed that Dorsey's submission was included as evidence of relevant personal experience. That response didn't sit well. The judge immediately questioned why a case built on credibility would depend on a figure whose own allegations had been legally dismissed and publicly discredited. His challenge left the defense visibly rattled, exposing how fragile their strategy had become and how a single misjudgment could undo weeks of preparation.
Claiming the relationship was consensual, and he was showing a lot of text. There's a lot of text messages in the legal filings as well, where you can see their text back.
Ellie Dorsey, once hailed as a federal whistleblower, has remained a familiar name in headlines, though her reputation tells a far more complicated story. What began as a celebrated case for workplace accountability ultimately crumbled when evidence revealed that her so-called harassment claims stemmed from an 11-year consensual affair with a married professor. When the truth surfaced, the professor filed a defamation suit, and the case ended in a settlement that legally obligated Dorsey to pay damages. The outcome transformed her from a symbol of justice into a cautionary tale about credibility and misrepresentation. Against that backdrop, Blake Lively's newly appointed attorney made what many observers now call the most damaging error of the trial, using Dorsey's name as moral support for the defense. The courtroom was already fragile following the prior day's drama, when Blake's lead counsel abruptly resigned, citing ethical conflicts. Into that vacuum stepped an untested substitute attorney, eager to stabilize the narrative but ill-prepared for the legal terrain ahead. Seeking to demonstrate strength, he leaned on letters of support from various advocacy groups, invoking the controversial and unofficial new Mito law, a doctrine suggesting that victims of harassment should be immune from defamation countersuits, regardless of case outcome. The problem arose when he singled out Dorsey's letter as a reflection of broader survivor experiences. The moment her name was read, murmurs swept through the courtroom. Valden's counsel immediately challenged the defense. Is the team truly relying on someone whose own allegations were proven false and legally dismissed? Judge Lehman, clearly taken aback, demanded clarity. The defense confirmed Dorsey's letter was meant to illustrate lived experience, a justification that instantly backfired. From that point, the courtroom's focus shifted entirely. Dorsey's history, once framed as heroic, was now a documented example of discredited claims, a legal precedent that stood in direct contradiction to the defense's narrative. Judge Lehman pressed the attorney on whether the letters had been properly vetted, but the response was vague, referencing external contributors and peer-reviewed sources without specifics. The judge's tone hardened as doubts grew over whether Blake's legal team was pursuing strategy or spectacle. Already weakened by the previous day's turmoil, the defense's credibility continued to erode. Every argument tied to Dorsey only deepened the skepticism. The replacement attorney attempted to pivot, emphasizing the collective importance of all letters submitted, but the damage was done. Dorsey's involvement overshadowed every other name and cast a shadow over the entire case. By leaning on an untested legal theory and amplifying one of the most controversial figures in recent legal memory, the defense unintentionally undermined its own position. As proceedings continued, Judge Lehman's demeanor shifted noticeably. His questions became sharper, his tone more doubtful, signaling that the foundation of Blake's defense was beginning to collapse. Observers noted the widening gap between the moral high ground the defense tried to claim and the practical weakness of their arguments. What was intended as a show of advocacy had turned into a display of fragility. In trying to merge the language of social justice with courtroom logic, Blake's team exposed its own inconsistencies, demonstrating how quickly a case can unravel when it relies more on optics than on solid legal footing.
Okay, so this YouTube channel called Cassidy O'Connell looked into the legal case from Elise Dorsey.
The fallout didn't stop with Dorsey's letter. The mistakenly filed document contained far more damaging material, including a full investigative report by journalist Cassidy O'Connell. Her exposé, which had already gone viral, meticulously dismantled Dorsey's original claims. Within the folder were court filings, verified text exchanges, and a comprehensive timeline that painted a devastating picture, one that completely undercut the defense's position. What was meant to bolster Blake Lively's case had, instead, placed irrefutable contradictions on the record, evidence that only deepened the cracks in her legal foundation.
It's crazy! So this woman had a relationship to this professor for 11 years while she was also married. He was married and she was also married.
Cassidy O'Connell's investigation uncovered a series of flirtatious and emotionally charged messages Dorsey had sent during the very period she later described as harassment. The texts told a very different story, one filled with affection, jealousy, and even veiled threats when the professor distanced himself. In one particularly striking message, Dorsey wrote, "If you think you can just walk away from me, you're wrong." Incredibly, Blake's defense cited that same correspondence as part of their moral narrative. As Judge Lehman read through O'Connell's printed excerpts, the courtroom fell into heavy silence. The messages revealed a pattern of persistence, Dorsey appearing uninvited at the professor's workplace, pleading for reconciliation, and at times issuing threats of public exposure. The defense offered no objection, no denial, only a weak attempt to redirect the conversation toward abstract ideals of advocacy. But principle means little when confronted with hard evidence. Each new revelation chipped away at what was left of the defense's credibility, revealing a strategy built on unstable ground. For many observing, the sequence of mistakes told its own story. If Blake's legal team could elevate a figure so clearly discredited, what else in their argument might have been distorted or ignored? The trial no longer looked like a battle over facts. It was fast becoming a case study in how a defense can collapse under the weight of its own misjudgments.
See their texts back and forth, and after 11 years, when he actually wanted to end the relationship, she was not happy about it, and she got jealous.
Then came the point from which there was no recovery. It was read aloud in open court. Ellie Dorsey had lost her case and paid to settle it. That single statement erased any illusion that her letter carried legal weight or moral credibility. It hadn't been written in pursuit of justice. It was an exercise in reputation control. The once defended new Mito law, meant to protect victims from defamation counterclaims, suddenly appeared less like advocacy and more like a loophole crafted to shield discredited voices. Judge Lehman, unimpressed and visibly irritated, asked pointedly, "Does the defense truly expect this court to uphold a legal theory created by someone who was found to have lied under oath?" The courtroom went still. That silence, heavy and absolute, said more than any argument Blake's team had managed to make. It marked the moment their defense truly began to unravel, leaving their credibility exposed before the judge and everyone watching.
Ended up showing up at his campus and yelling at him. So after 11 years of a consensual relationship, she sued him for SH, and then he ended up suing her back for defamation. The lawsuit ended up being settled, and she had to pay.
The final blow arrived when Judge Lehman began probing the origins of the so-called advocacy letters. His questions were direct and unrelenting. Who vetted these documents? Who approved their inclusion? Was Ms. Lively aware of the sources? The answers were uncertain, vague enough to suggest concealment rather than caution. Then came the revelation that stunned the courtroom. While reviewing the accidentally submitted files, the court discovered an entirely separate set of materials. Archived Reddit threads, complete with timestamps, showing Ellie Dorsey's attempts to scrub her own public record. The posts detailed how Dorsey had deleted negative LinkedIn comments, removed mentions of her failed lawsuit, and quietly edited her online narrative. Ironically, the discovery had been preserved by anonymous Reddit users, self-styled internet detectives, whose diligence now outshone the defense's own. Screenshots displayed before the court showed entire discussions disappearing within hours of being posted, each questioning Dorsey's credibility. Why had she stayed in contact with the man she accused? Why were the settlement details hidden? Why was she promoting a legal doctrine born from a case she had lost? Every missing comment became proof of deliberate image control. Judge Lehman read the archived posts aloud, observing, "This appears to reflect a consistent pattern of narrative manipulation. Is the defense aware that their key moral reference has been actively erasing public records of her loss?" The defense stammered a weak objection, claiming personal matters were irrelevant. But the silence that followed said otherwise. The courtroom was no longer witnessing a routine dispute. It was witnessing a public unraveling. What was meant to be Blake Lively's moral shield had transformed into an exhibit of negligence and poor judgment. In their failure to vet sources or anticipate consequences, her legal team had invited the very scrutiny they hoped to avoid. By the end, it was clear. This wasn't just a case collapsing. It was a credibility implosion, one unfolding in real time under the unblinking eye of the court.